I've spent countless hours in airport terminals, rental car lots, and driving through jurisdictions all over this country. And if there is one universal experience that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, it's seeing those flashing red and blue lights in your rearview mirror. It doesn't matter if you're a frequent flyer picking up a rental in a strange city or just heading home from the grocery store. That moment stops you cold. Your heart does this little flip. Your mind starts racing through every move you made in the last 5 minutes, and you're suddenly acutely aware of every single item in your car. But here is the thing that keeps me up at night, and it's the reason I had to sit down and write this out for you. What happens in the first 10 seconds of that stop will determine the entire trajectory of your next hour, or, in some worst-case scenarios, the next several years of your life. And there is one specific question, a seemingly innocent opener that cops use almost universally, that acts as a legal and psychological trap. It sounds like small talk. It sounds like they're giving you a chance to explain yourself. But I am telling you, as someone who has studied this, who has watched travelers and locals alike walk right into a legal buzzsaw because they didn't understand the game, that question is designed to get you to convict yourself before you've even been charged with anything. That question is, of course, do you know why I pulled you over? And before I go any further, I need to hear from you. I want you to think back to the last time you were pulled over, or imagine the scenario right now. Be honest with yourself. When that officer walked up to your window and asked that question, what came out of your mouth? Did you immediately apologize? Did you start guessing? Did you say, was I speeding? Or did I not use my turn signal? I want you to drop that in the comments. Tell me exactly what you said or what you think you would say, because the answer to that question is going to shock you. And I promise you, by the time you finish reading this, you're going to realize that most of us have been getting it dangerously wrong our entire driving lives. I want to pause on that for a second because I know some of you are thinking, come on, it's just a traffic ticket. Just be polite and it'll be fine. And look, 90% of the time, if it's a minor infraction and you're a normal, law-abiding citizen, that's probably true. You'll get a warning or you'll sign the ticket and you'll go on with your day. But I'm not writing this for the 90% scenario. I'm writing this for the 10%. I'm writing this for the times when you're driving through a jurisdiction you don't know, when you're in a rental car that might have a tail light out that you didn't know about, when you've got luggage from the airport in the back seat, or when you've simply made a stupid mistake that looks a lot like something more sinister to an officer who's had a long shift. The traffic stop is the most common way that ordinary citizens come into direct contact with law enforcement. It's the front door of the American criminal justice system for millions of people. And just like you wouldn't walk into a courtroom and start arguing your case before the judge asks you a question, you shouldn't start arguing your case on the side of the highway. But that's exactly what happens when you answer that first question. Let's break down the psychology of the officer for a second, because I think it's crucial to understanding why your words matter so much. The officer walking up to your car does not know you. They see a vehicle with tinted windows, a driver with their hands possibly moving around, reaching for the glove box, or looking panicked. They are trained to be hyper-vigilant. Their number one priority is their own safety. In that state of heightened awareness, they ask a question that seems like a simple conversation starter. Do you know why I pulled you over? What they are actually doing, whether they consciously intend to or not, is opening an interrogation. They want to hear you speak. They want to hear if your voice is shaky. They want to see if you immediately admit to something. But more importantly, legally speaking, they are trying to establish particularized suspicion, or even gather evidence for a crime you haven't been accused of yet. Think about the trap here. If you say, "No, officer, I have no idea," you might come across as clueless or, worse, dishonest. They might think, this guy is either completely oblivious to his surroundings, or he's lying to me. But the alternative, what most people do, is far, far worse. Most people, because they are socialized to be polite and helpful, immediately start speculating. They say things like, "Was I going a little too fast there?" Or, "I'm sorry, I know I probably rolled that stop sign." This is what we call an admission. You have just given the officer the reason for the stop. Even if they pulled you over for a broken taillight and you immediately confess to speeding, you've just opened the door. You've admitted to a moving violation that they may not have even had on their radar. You've given them the gift of a guaranteed ticket, or worse, probable cause to ask you to step out of the vehicle to check for impairment if you sound confused about your speed. There's a famous legal principle at play here, and it's something I want you to keep in the back of your mind every time you get behind the wheel. It's related to the Fifth Amendment and your right to remain silent. Most people associate pleading the Fifth with a courtroom or with hardened criminals on TV shows. They think that asserting that right on a traffic stop would be aggressive, suspicious, or insulting to the officer. But the Supreme Court has been pretty clear that silence in the face of police questioning is not, by itself, proof of guilt. You have a right to not be a witness against yourself. And that's exactly what you're doing when you answer that first question. You're acting as a witness against yourself. You're doing the officer's job for them. They have the burden of proof to show that you committed a violation. By answering that question, you are potentially relieving them of that burden. So, if you're not supposed to guess, and you're not supposed to just shrug, what on earth are you supposed to say? This is the part where I'm going to give you the exact script, the exact phrase that I have used myself, and that I advise every single person who travels or drives to memorize. It feels counterintuitive. It feels a little bit like you're being difficult. But it is your legal right, and it is the safest thing you can possibly do. When the officer asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" you need to look them in the eye, calmly, respectfully, and say, "Officer, I have a general idea, but I'd rather not say. I'm sure you'll let me know." Or a slightly shorter version, "I'd rather not answer that specific question, but I'm happy to cooperate with the stop. Let's dissect why this works." First, you're not being defiant. You're not saying, "I refuse to speak to you." You're saying you have a general idea, which shows you're not completely oblivious to the road, but you're politely declining to incriminate yourself. You are putting the ball back in their court where it legally belongs. You are forcing them to do their job, to articulate the specific reason they initiated the stop. This does a few things. It protects you from accidentally admitting to a more serious offense. It prevents you from lying, because if you guess wrong and they pulled you over for something else, you've now potentially created a conflict. And it establishes, from the very first interaction, that you are a knowledgeable person who understands your rights but is not looking for a fight. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, that's going to make the officer angry. That's going to make them assume I'm hiding something. And I'm not going to lie to you, it might. Some officers will bristle at this. They are used to a certain dynamic where they are in complete control of the conversation. When you politely assert a right, it can disrupt that dynamic. But here is the deeper truth, and this is where my experience as a traveler comes into play. An officer's reaction to you politely exercising your rights tells you everything you need to know about how the rest of that stop is going to go. If they are a professional, they will simply say, "Okay, I pulled you over because you failed to come to a complete stop at the sign back there." And the stop proceeds normally. If they get hostile, if they say, "Why, are you trying to hide something from me?" Or, "That's not how this works. You need to answer my questions." You are now dealing with someone who may be operating outside of the boundaries of a standard professional interaction. And that knowledge in itself is valuable. It tells you that you need to be hyper-vigilant. It tells you that you should keep your hands on the wheel, make no sudden movements, and if they ask for consent to search the vehicle, you need to be prepared to say the next most important phrase, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." But let's go back to that opening gambit for a second, because the nuances of it are what really fascinate me. The phrase, "I have a general idea," is a stroke of genius, and it's not mine originally. It comes from some of the best legal minds and defense attorneys in the country. It's a verbal shield. It covers you if you were obviously doing something wrong. You're not claiming ignorance. You're acknowledging that you are a reasonable person who is aware of their surroundings. But you're not specifying. You're not saying, "Yeah, I was speeding." Because what if they pulled you over because your license plate light is out and they didn't even notice your speed. If you admit to speeding and they decide to check your speed via radar, or just write it down based on your admission, you've just manufactured a ticket for yourself. Imagine you're driving a rental car. You just landed at an airport in a state you've never driven in before. The car feels different. The accelerator is touchier. You might have been going 40 in a 35 without even realizing it. The officer lights you up. You pull over. You're flustered because you're in an unfamiliar city. Your GPS is still mounted on the dash, and you're trying to find your insurance paperwork, which isn't in your usual car. He asks the question. If you blurt out, "Sorry, officer, I'm not from here. Was I speeding?" You have just admitted to the primary reason he pulled you over. He now has a slam dunk case for a citation. You leave the interaction with a fine, possibly points on your license, which your home state will find out about, and a higher insurance premium, all because you did the officer's job for them. Now let's say you use the script. "Officer, I'd rather not speculate. I'm sure you'll tell me." He says, "I pulled you over for speeding. Do you know how fast you were going?" This is another trap. He's asking for more specific admission. Your response should be calm and consistent. "I understand, officer. I'm not going to discuss my speed." At this point, he has the radar reading, or he doesn't. He has to rely on his own evidence. If his radar was faulty, if he misjudged, if he clocked the car next to you, you haven't given him the ammunition to make a weak case strong. This isn't about being sneaky or trying to beat the system. This is about fundamental fairness. The system is designed to require the state to prove its case against you. That's not a loophole. That's the foundation of our justice system. When you voluntarily provide evidence against yourself, you are waiving that fundamental protection. And I want to extend this beyond just the speeding ticket scenario, because this is where it gets really serious for travelers, especially those of us who spend a lot of time on the road. Imagine you're driving late at night from the airport to a hotel. You're tired. You're in a rental car with out-of-state plates. That alone can sometimes be a reason for officers to pay closer attention, especially in certain parts of the country where rental cars are associated with drug trafficking corridors. You make a wide turn because you're not used to the car's turning radius. The lights come on. You pull over. You're jet-lagged. You're rummaging for your license. The officer sees the rental agreement, sees the luggage, and sees a tired, nervous driver. He asks the question. You, trying to be helpful, say, "Man, I'm sorry, I'm just so tired from my flight, I probably wasn't paying attention." You have just given him reasonable suspicion to investigate you for driving under the influence or for fatigue-related impairment. He might ask you to step out for field sobriety tests. You are now on the side of the road at midnight, in a city you don't know, performing physical tests that are notoriously difficult to pass perfectly, even when sober. Had you simply said, "Officer, I'd rather not answer that, but I'm happy to provide my license and registration," the interaction remains focused on the wide turn. He runs your license, sees you're clean, gives you a warning or a ticket, and you're on your way. Instead, by volunteering information about your physical state, you invited a much deeper level of scrutiny. This is what I mean when I say that the traffic stop is a game of information. The officer is gathering intelligence. They are observing your speech patterns, your eye movements, the smell of the car, the items visible in the cabin. Every word you say is a data point. Your job, if you want to protect yourself, is to limit the data points they can collect. You provide your documents. You answer basic identifying questions, name, date of birth. But you do not engage in discussion about the reason for the stop, your travel plans, your destination, or your activities. There is a common misconception that you have to answer every question an officer asks. You don't. In most states, you are required to identify yourself. You are required to provide your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. You are not required to answer questions like, "Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Have you been drinking tonight?" Or, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I remember reading a case study a few years ago about a man driving cross-country. He was a veteran, a clean-cut guy with no record. He was pulled over for a minor lane violation. When the officer asked where he was coming from, he said he was visiting family. The officer asked if he had any drugs or weapons in the car. He said no. The officer asked if he could search the car. The man, confident he had nothing to hide, said yes. He thought that cooperating would show he was a good guy and he'd get off with a warning. The officer found a bag that belonged to the man's friend. Inside the bag was a small amount of marijuana. The man was arrested. He spent the night in jail. He had to hire a lawyer. The charges were eventually dropped because it was his friend's bag, but the damage was done. The arrest record, the legal fees, the stress. All because he answered questions he didn't have to answer and consented to a search he didn't have to consent to. If he had used the initial script, the entire interaction would have been different. The officer asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The man says, "I'd rather not say, officer." The officer says, "You swerved a little back there. Have you been drinking?" The man says, "I'm not going to answer that, officer. I'm going to respectfully decline to answer questions." The officer might press for a search. The man says, "I do not consent to searches. Am I free to go, or am I being detained?" At that point, the officer has to make a decision. He has a minor lane violation. He has no evidence of intoxication. He has a driver who is being polite but firm. Most likely, he runs the license, writes a warning for the lane violation, and the man goes on his way. The bag in the back seat never becomes an issue. I want to emphasize the polite but firm aspect of this, because tone is everything. I've seen people take this advice and turn it into a confrontation. They roll their eyes, they sigh dramatically, they say, "I refuse to answer your questions," in a huffy, aggressive tone. That is not the goal. The goal is to be a boring, respectful, but rights-respecting citizen. You want to give the officer no reason to remember you. You want to be so calm and professional that they have no justification for extending the stop. Remember, the clock is ticking. Under Supreme Court precedent, like Rodriguez v. United States, an officer cannot prolong a traffic stop beyond the time reasonably necessary to complete the mission of the stop, which is to address the traffic violation and issue a citation or warning. Once they've run your license and decided whether to give you a ticket, they are supposed to let you go. If they want to ask you questions about other crimes or ask to search your car, they need either your consent or a separate reasonable suspicion. By politely declining to answer questions, you are not only protecting your rights, you are also putting a timer on the interaction. You are denying them the easy path to prolonging the stop. There is a specific power dynamic that I want to unpack here because it explains why we feel so compelled to talk. We are conditioned from a young age to respect authority figures, especially police officers. We are taught that if we are honest and upfront, things will go better for us. And in many social contexts, that's true. But a traffic stop is not a social context. It is a legal proceeding, even if it doesn't look like one. It's an adversarial process. The officer has a goal: enforcing laws, ensuring safety, sometimes investigating crime. You have a goal: getting out of there with as few consequences as possible. Your interests are not aligned. The honesty is the best policy mindset is what gets people in trouble. They think, if I just admit I was speeding, he'll see I'm an honest person and let me off. I hate to break it to you, but that almost never happens. What happens is you hand him the evidence he needs to write you a ticket. He doesn't need your honesty to decide to be lenient. He needs your demeanor and his own assessment. In fact, admitting fault can sometimes be seen as a sign of weakness that invites a citation. The officer thinks, well, even they admit they did it, so I might as well write it up. Let's talk about the search aspect for a moment, because it's the natural next step if an officer becomes suspicious. After you've declined to answer the initial question, the officer might circle back. They might say, look, I'm not going to give you a ticket for the speeding, I'm just going to give you a warning. But before I let you go, I have a few questions. This is a common tactic. They try to build rapport. They try to make you feel grateful that you're not getting a ticket, so you'll let your guard down. Then they'll ask, you wouldn't happen to have any drugs or weapons in the car, would you? Or, do you mind if I just take a quick look around the car? This is the moment. This is the second trap. And the answer must be immediate and clear. Officer, I do not consent to any searches. Do not say, well, I don't have anything to hide. That phrase is the siren song of the wrongly detained. It doesn't matter if you have nothing to hide. The search is an invasion of your privacy. It's a delay, and it's a slippery slope. If they search and find something that belongs to a passenger, or something you forgot was in the car, or something that is legal in your home state, but not in this state, like a CBD product with trace THC, you are now in a world of trouble. By consenting, you waive your right to challenge the search later. If you say, "I do not consent," and they search anyway and find nothing, you have a strong case for a civil rights violation. If they search and find something, your lawyer can argue that the search was illegal and the evidence should be suppressed. If you consent, you have no such argument. This brings us to the reality of traveling with rental cars. When you rent a car, you are in a unique legal position. The car is not yours, but you are the lawful possessor. You have standing to object to a search. However, the rental agreement sometimes has clauses that could be interpreted as giving consent to searches. That's a gray area, and it's one of the reasons I always advise renters to be extra cautious. If you're in a rental car, the officer might say, "This isn't even your car. Why do you care if I look?" This is a pressure tactic. Your response should be the same. "I am the lawful driver of this vehicle, and I do not consent to a search." Do not get into a debate about the rental contract. Do not explain that your aunt rented it for you. Just stick to your script. I also want to address the reality of modern policing and the use of K9 units. In many jurisdictions, officers will prolong a stop just long enough for a drug-sniffing dog to arrive and walk around the vehicle. This is a contentious area of law. The Supreme Court has ruled that a dog sniff is not a search under the Fourth Amendment, meaning you don't have the same protections. However, the stop cannot be prolonged unreasonably to wait for the dog. This is why the timer aspect of the stop is so crucial. If you have answered all the questions, provided your documents, and the officer is just standing there waiting for a dog, you can ask, "Officer, am I free to go?" If they say no, they are detaining you, and they need a reasonable suspicion to do so beyond the original traffic violation. If they say yes, you are free to go, you should calmly roll up your window and drive away. If they say no, you are not free to go, then you are being detained, and you can ask for a lawyer. This is where things get very serious, and it's beyond the scope of a simple traffic stop advice, but it's good to know your escalation path. I want to circle all the way back to the beginning now, because I think we've covered a lot of ground, but the core of the message is simple. The phrase, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" is a loaded question. It is not a request for information. It is a test. It is a trap. And the only way to win that game is to refuse to play. You are not being rude by saying, "I'd rather not answer that." You are being smart. You are protecting your future. You are ensuring that if you have to contest a ticket in court, you haven't already admitted guilt on the roadside. You are ensuring that a simple traffic stop doesn't escalate into a search, an arrest, or a life-changing legal battle. I think about this every time I get behind the wheel, especially when I'm in a new state, driving a car I'm not used to. The roads are unfamiliar, the local laws might be slightly different, like right-on-red restrictions or cell phone laws, and the local police have their own cultures and priorities. It's a high-risk environment. And the first line of defense is not a radar detector or a fancy dash cam. It's your mouth. It's knowing when to keep it shut. There is a reason why defense attorneys will tell you over and over again that the vast majority of their clients talk themselves into trouble. They don't get arrested because of the initial infraction. They get arrested because of what they said and what they consented to afterward. The initial infraction is just the ticket to the dance. Your words determine whether you leave the dance quietly or get thrown out the back door. So, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I really want you to think about this and leave a comment. After reading all of this, after understanding the psychology and the law, does it change your perspective on that moment? Have you ever been in a situation where you answered that question and instantly regretted it? Or maybe you answered it and got off, but now you realize how much luck was involved in that outcome? I want to hear your stories. I want to know if you've ever used this script or something like it and how the officer reacted. Drop it in the comments. Let's get a conversation going. Because the more we talk about this, the more we share our experiences, the better prepared we all are for that moment when the lights come on. And the next time you're driving, whether it's across town or across the country, and you see that police cruiser behind you, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to take a deep breath. Put your hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. Wait for the officer to come to you. And when that first question comes out of their mouth, I want you to be ready. Not ready to argue, not ready to fight, but ready to protect yourself with the most powerful tool you have, your silence on the matters that can hurt you. Because in that moment, the best thing you can say is often the thing you don't say. And that, right there, is the difference between a story you tell your friends and a story that costs you thousands of dollars and a permanent record. Drive safe, stay aware, and remember, you have rights, but they only work if you use them. This response is AI generated for reference only.